I am incredibly honored just to be able to share the stage and share the space with such incredible speakers, such incredible leaders doing amazing things. You guys do me one more favor and just give them a massive round of applause for I love it. It's great to be here with you all. I want you guys to shift your mindset a little bit, right? Towards this next few minutes before we prepare for lunch, before we prepare to go into the afternoon. I want you guys thinking about your workplaces. You know, all the things we've talked about, culture and leadership and identity and choices, impact us at work. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. My next few minutes, my goal is to share with you some ideas, some framework that we do at Think3D, how we run our team, how we run our organizations, so we can work on building the next version of your culture. Many of you are here with people that you work with, and we're talking a little bit about how much of an impact that has on our lives. So one of the first things I want to share is just some throwback photos. Our vision and versions at Think3D started a long time ago. Those are some much younger, much less gray men in that photo. But we started out with a vision, and Bonnie and Tammy started Think3D in 2016, and that's changed over the years. The way that we thought this business would look, the way that we thought our impact would look has changed. It's not necessarily the vision that we planned, but it's the vision that we built. And you know, whether that's changing our business model from retreats and box sets of books and trainings that we would give people to now providing really in-depth service and training for a lot of different organizations all over the place. We're not just in Sioux Falls. We actually started out in more places across the country, and then kind of came back in 2020 when things got a little weird and started working more locally in our area. And so now, in fact, one of our very, very first clients, near and dear to us, is the Rapid City Area School Nutrition Team. And they're just an incredible group. Took an early bet on us, on Bonnie and Tammy back in the day, and we've been working with them for a number of years. And so we're really incredibly honored to be able to have the access that we do with a lot of organizations. The cool thing about all this, though, is we've been able to change and we've been able to pivot. We've been able to do different things. We've been able to change our vision or our version because we have a really, really firm core belief. And one of the things that we believe is we believe that there's a better way when it talks about work. One thing I want to challenge you guys to think about, and we're going to talk about it more later, is what do I believe? What is my belief statement as a team member or as an organization, right? See, at Think3D, we believe that we can better the world by changing people's lives, by improving the way that they work. That's a lofty goal. We think we can better the world. But we know that work has such an incredible impact on people's lives that it's just that important to do so. So we think we can better the world by changing people's lives, by improving the way they work. And we think about work, just to share some of this, a lot of you who are in leadership or manage people who have to do with hiring, none of this information is going to be new, but it's going to build a little bit of context for us. On average, and we talk about this in terms of hours, right, or percentage of your time spent, most working professionals spend about 50 to 65% of their waking hours, their entire life, at work. It's about 115,000 hours on average. Clifton, which does the Strengths Finder, they do a whole bunch of other organizational research. They do research every year, global research, and they talked about relationships and connectivity. And 25% of the people they researched across the world said, I don't have a best friend or I'm alone. Loneliness is an epidemic, so we know we spend an incredible amount of time at work. We know that connections are lacking. We also know that the job market is changing. We're talking about just where we operate out of Sioux Falls. There's about 5,200 open jobs and only 2,300 people on unemployment, which means that the old adage of people don't want to work anymore isn't necessarily true. They might work, they might just not want to work for you. How do we figure out why? How do we get them there? The other thing is retention is changing. Back several years ago, we would have thought that maybe anyone who stays at an organization 3 years or less, and I actually had a really interesting conversation with a young man who's a law enforcement professional even just last night, talking about how he's like, yeah, like I get crap because I'm a job hopper. And he's been at he'll do 4 years at an agency and go somewhere else, and then go somewhere else, and then go somewhere else. On average, most employees across the globe, across the country, they only spend about 2.8 years if they're between the ages of 25 and 34. And so those of you who are employers in the room, the majority of your workforce where you're going to be getting people is you might only have a 3-year working relationship at most. So what does this mean? This means we have to shift our mindset, and we have to shift our mindset really intentionally about the way we consider culture, employee experience, and employee engagement. One of the things I want you guys to consider is recruitment and retention and employee experience cannot be departmental, HR, or marketing or communications initiatives. These are global initiatives. If every functional area in your entire organization isn't aligned on how we're creating environments and how we're handling employee experience, you're missing a massive, massive opportunity. This is everyone's job. Everyone participates in building this thing. It's global. The next thing we have to think about is changing the way that we view employment. I don't believe that we can or should talk about employment as kind of this obligatory thing where people work for us. I think people work with us, right? They work for themselves. They have families, they have homes, they've got accounts payable and accounts receivable at homes, they've got HR initiatives in their life and teams in their life. And so people work with us, and when we consider this, it allows us to kind of bridge that gap where there's this dissent almost between employer and employee relationships. When we talk about those things in different terms, it allows us to think about it differently, because at the end of the day, employees and employers, we want the same things. Employees want flexibility. Awesome. So do employers. We want to be able to change a call, shift a scope of work, right? Make an adjustment to something as we go, and we want that flexibility for each other. Grace in that manner for each other. Employees want autonomy or independence. Great. Employers really, really like having people that make independent decisions and can solve problems on their own. And so we want these same things. And so we look at employment differently. We have to look at it as more of a partnership. We are doing life with these people. And that has to shift really intentionally now. The last thing that I want us to think about is how are we creating environments, not events. When we talk about coaching, training, accountability, employee experience, all of these things, we oftentimes look for events that we can manage. And rather, I want you guys to think about shifting your mindset towards an environment. What's the environment that I want to create? Is it a coaching environment from day zero? Somebody steps in the door on my team. Do they understand that we coach here? This is the standard we coach to. This is how we do it. And it doesn't just happen when something gets dropped. It doesn't just happen when a mistake gets made. It's an environment, and it's constant. All right, so again, we understand that it's a global mindset. Everybody's in the boat. All right, participation is required, whether you like it or not. All right, employment is not just somebody coming to work for us and exchanging time for money. It is a partnership. We are doing life with these people. The way that we send people home at the end of the day informs the way that they come back to us the next day. It is a partnership. And the last thing is environments, not events. One of the phrases that we say a lot at Think 3D is a culture will emerge, whether intended or not. But if it's not one you invest in, it will certainly be one that you pay for. Anyone who's followed us, worked with us, been with us for any amount of time has heard that, and probably is sick of hearing it by now. But it's really, really important. One other point I'm going to add on to that is a culture is one that will in fact pay you. Like, we say this about how culture costs you money. Culture is important. Culture is something you should invest in. But the numbers are really impactful. And I'm not going to go through this entire thing. There's a study. It's called The Experience Mindset. It's based out of a book by Tiffany Bova and her team, 2015. And they talked about the massive impact to revenue and profit that having an employee experience and a culture that's really, really aligned has on your team. So we know there's data. This stuff pays off. And the crazy thing is, it compounds over time to the tune of like 40 or 50%. So this has a really, really big impact on the ability that we have to be a successful business or team. So, where do we start? How do we define culture? Before we get into this, one of the things that I think is super fundamental is, as a team, as a business, and I don't care if you have 2 employees, or if you're a solopreneur, or if you have a team of a massive organization, several hundred folks, all this stuff rings true for anyone in these situations. But one of the things is your functions, so how your team, how your business, how your operation functions, how you train, how you coach, how you make decisions, what systems you use, all of those things should align with and support the culture. So, Dan, what the heck does culture mean? One of the first things I want us to think about is I want us to think about our culture as an ecosystem. When you think of an ecosystem, think of nature, right? We're thinking in terms of plants, animals, water supplies, things like that. When you have an issue with a water supply in an ecosystem, is that the only thing that's affected? No. Every single thing is affected, right? There's countless examples you can look way around. It's even small impacts, what we would consider small impacts to environments, have massive changes. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us one, when we think about ecosystems, everything's interconnected. There's nothing you can do to an ecosystem that is in fact net zero or neutral. Everything diminishes or adds to. Every choice you make. Whitney was just up here sharing about culture and choices. And that's a big thing. So people ask me all the time, Dan, you train on cultures a lot. You do this with a lot of organizations. What does culture mean to you? And I tell them, our culture could be summed up by our behaviors. If you took the choices that every single person in your organization makes every single day, mix those together, dump it out, that net result is going to be your culture. It's an active thing you participate in, right? It's always dynamic. And then I go a layer further than that, and I think about, okay, what informs our behaviors and choices? How do we start shaping this idea for our culture beyond things that are just ideals, right? Or beyond things that might not be actionable. And so I come back to this foundation of belief. On our team and our organization, we're able to shape all sorts of different things that we do because we have that strong foundation of belief, right? We believe we can change the world by improving people's lives, by improving the way that they work. And that shapes all that we do. Because our beliefs, at the end of the day, inform our behaviors, which informs your culture. So one of the things we have organizations do, every organization, we start off right away by having them define the vision and the expectations for their culture. If you're a team of any size today, and you haven't sat down and clearly defined, hey, what is the type of environment or culture that we want to build, and what do we want out of it? It's not enough to just say, oh, well, I want a healthy one. Of course you do. Everybody wants a healthy one. Oh, I want one where we communicate well. Great. How do we do it? What does it look like? What choices are we making every day that allow us to know, are we on the right track? Are we communicating in the way that we need to? We have to define the vision and the expectations for our culture. Secondly, we have to communicate what that culture is, what that environment is, clearly and often. It shouldn't just be something that is on your landing page. It shouldn't just be something that's on your tagline or on your collateral, even though those are great places to start. It should be in our physical spaces. It should be in the way we train. It should be in every aspect of our organization. We have to communicate the specific expectations we want to see out of our environment. How do we want to make people feel? How do we want to communicate to people? How do we want to hold people accountable? Right? When we have a difficult decision to make, what's our North Star that gets us back to knowing we're on the right track? You have to communicate those things clearly and often. Because I believe that when you have belief-driven values, meaning our values as a team, our values as a unit, are driven by really clearly defined beliefs, in turn then, you have value-based systems. The way you train, the people you work with, the vendors you choose, the partners you choose. We're unbelievably fortunate with our team to have a few organizations we work with. I mean, there's a couple of great examples today. To pull off something like this in 2 different locations across the state in a matter of a few weeks is incredible. And we work with organizations and teams like Pinnacle, like Jane Ray, because we align, right? The energy matches, those beliefs match up, those values match up, right? And it informs everything we do. We have belief-driven values and we have value-driven systems. So where does this take us? And I'm going to give you guys a few examples. Any of the guard folks that are out here in the afternoon might have heard some of these things. One of these ended up in the news the other day. I thought about using a different example, but we'll figure it out. This is the F-35, the Joint Fighter Project. I'm not going to go into too much detail with this. I'm going to give you guys high-level stuff. Great website called Google. Go check it out if you want to learn more. Google. All right. So the F-35 Joint Fighter Project was kind of a hallmark defense project. If you want to get nerdy with it, again, it was super expensive, $1.7 trillion. It's bigger than the Manhattan projects, just to put it in terms of scope. Involved a ton of different countries. Lockheed Martin is a company based in the US that won the contract. And there's a really interesting book and some really interesting interviews about how they pulled this off. And just to be fair, when I talk about case studies, there's good and bad examples, right? This whole thing was a few $100 billion over budget, and it was 10 years behind. And it's kind of an example of just how big these things can go. But there's a few things that I thought were really, really great examples. So one of the things they did is they grew fast. They scaled from about 180 employees or so when they first started this project to about 4,000 in a matter of 2 years. If you think you have a hiring problem, try hiring like 3,900 people in a matter of 2 years. It was insane. One of the first things they did, they said, we can't do this like anything we've done before. That's something we believe in at Think 3D. One of the things is the only way that we can't do it is the way it's always been done. That is the only thing we cannot do. So they said, hey, defense projects typically go like this. We know that that might not be the way to go. So we create a really specific identity around joint fighter projects. So I don't care if you work at Lockheed, if you work at Boeing, if you work at BAE, I don't care if you're from Germany, from the UK, from the US. One of the things we do is we take the best athlete approach. And that's something we believe to be true about culture because we look at culture as an ecosystem. Because every aspect of an ecosystem can have an impact on it, every aspect has the same value. And that's the way they approached it. They said, hey, it doesn't matter who's got seniority over here at Lockheed, if they're not the best person to lead this team, we're gonna get someone from over there to do it. And what they created was immediate participation and immediate engagement from people who were coming from teams where they weren't expecting that level of involvement. So they flipped the whole thing on their head. One of the other things that I really liked is the way they approached mentorship, apprenticeship, and coaching. If you're not trying to be intentional about the way you're doing these things in your organization, again, massive missed opportunity here. But mentorship, apprenticeship, and coaching, they did it in a 360-degree way, right? How many of you guys feel, show of hands, how many of you guys feel like you struggle with the generational gap with the new employees coming into the workforce a little bit? Yeah, a couple of you? The ones that don't have your hands up, you guys are lying, by the way. We all struggle with that, right? What they did was really interesting. They took more senior level engineers or employees, people that had the experience, things you can't learn in school, right? And they said, hey, you're gonna mentor these new employees coming out of academies or coming out of universities. You young folks coming in, you're gonna mentor and coach all of our senior employees on new stuff that's old now but new back then when they started this, AutoCAD, digital design software, technology, things like email, which is new to them, right? You're gonna mentor both ways. And so they had people coming in that were younger, that had the technology skills, and they said, hey, you're gonna mentor and coach them. Older folks who have more experience, you're gonna mentor and coach them on the navigating projects like this, navigating stress, things like that. There's a few other great examples. For the sake of time, I'm gonna hit just one of those last ones, and one of the things that they instilled early on in this process was that participation is required. They had every single person at the table in a leadership sense, even end users, customers, in this case, governments, militaries, things like that, which traditionally was a no-go. They kind of kept things tight. We don't want people messing with our project while we're doing it. Keep the customer out of it. And sometimes we have that mentality. And something that I really liked that they did is they brought everyone to the table. And they said, hey, we want to be as open and honest with you guys as possible, and participation is required. So we're thinking about building a culture, right? We're thinking about building something for our teams. Everyone has to participate, right? Again, back to the ecosystem mentality. There's nothing you can do in your organization or on your team that has a neutral impact, right? It might not be super large. It might take a long time, but they all have an impact one way or the other. Another quick lesson, we're talking about coaching and training. I actually spoke to somebody this morning who had experience at Microsoft. I was like, oh, well, you're gonna hear me talk about it later on. But Microsoft for a long time didn't have a great rap for customer experience or culture. Again, go check some of this story out on your own if you want to learn a little bit more about it. But in 2014, a new guy took over as CEO. He'd been an executive there for quite a few years. And he decided to say, hey, we're gonna start at the top, and we're gonna change this thing. And we're thinking about shifting our culture, shifting our environment for this new market, this new generation, this new workforce, because we want our organizations to be sustainable. We have to think about it differently, and change starts from the top. And so they adopted a beginner's mindset, or a learn-it-all mindset. For years, internally, the way they made decisions, the way they coached, the way they hired, they said, we know it all, we are the experts. Anyone who's dealt with Microsoft enterprise-level customer support knows that might not always be the case. But they adopted a different mindset in 2014. They said, now we're learners. We're beginners. We are here to learn it all. One of the things that they did is they adopted a coaching mindset, and they developed a training program that would allow them to train constantly. Anyone who's in the space of learning and development or training in their organizations, go dive into this. Meet me at lunch or something afterwards. It's really interesting. But the thing that I want you to take away from this is that they trained all the time to build the type of environment they wanted. They kept it real. They didn't use clinical language or organizational development terms. They kept it real and accessible. They used impactful terms, right? They also did kind of a cohort-based training, so it was relevant to the people that they needed it to be relevant to. Sometimes we go to trainings and you're like, this is great, how do I use it? Well, if you're a frontline employee, you got frontline relevant training. If you're in middle management, you got middle management level training. And those questions scaled. It was all built around their singular coaching mindset, because what they wanted to do was they wanted to build an environment, not events. They start coaching from day one. You come in, hey, guess what, guys? We have a coaching environment here. What does that mean? That means that we hold each other accountable. We require constant growth. We do promise to challenge you, and we do promise to support you. But you are going to get better. Just so you know, that happens from day one. They had that entire environment, top to bottom. And it's been about a decade, kind of a 10-year turnaround for them. But now, they're kind of heralded for having a really, really positive shift in their organizational culture. So the last few things here as we start to land this, I want you to think about this. How do we build it? How do we build something like this? How do we take some of these examples and say, all right, this is cool, Dan, this is neat info. How do I apply it to my team? One of the things I want you to think about is starting with belief. This goes beyond mission, vision, values. Those are great. We'll get to those in just a second. But it starts with belief. At a core level, I want you to think about, what do you believe to be true about the world, your role in it, and your work in it? Right? Our belief at Think 3D is that we believe we can better the world. That is a lofty freaking goal. But we believe we can do it by changing people's lives, by improving the way people work, because we believe there's a better way to do it. You spend 65% of your time at work, going to work, preparing for work, recovering from work, talking about work. It has a big, big impact. So we believe to our foundation, to our core. Does that make sense to you guys? This is beyond mission, vision, values. Those are objectives. Those are outcomes. Your belief is your North Star. When we start with our belief, what we do is we create a culture that has depth. You gotta stop making your cultures, your mission, vision, values, you gotta stop making those things for taglines, for content, for collateral. We have to start making cultures that have depth. Things that people can buy into and understand the history of. See, but long before we were talking about culture as organizational terms, right? We're talking about culture as stories. We share stories. We share beliefs. We share those things. What are those rich things about your culture and your team? The background that informs the choices that you make going forward, right? Within your culture. It should also be fun. People are weird about that, but we have some things that Think 3D. We have some lore and some stories, but we also try to have a good time. When we start with our belief, we get to build those things in a really rich and intentional way. Also, your culture needs to be functional. What I mean by that is beyond your mission, vision, values. So you have your mission, which is your objective, right? That's what we're here to do. We have our vision, which is our outcome. If we achieve our objective, this is the vision we want to build. Then we have our values, which is our way that we want to do it. What's the manner in which we want to work? What are the things that we value as a team, right? Those are awesome. Sometimes they leave us a little bit short when it comes to terms of how does it function? How does it work with our team? How does it work with our organization? One of the things that we talk about at Think 3D, and we've developed this with a number of organizations over the years, starting with ourselves, we have what we call the Think 3D way, right? And the Think 3D way is the manner in which we expect people to behave. It goes beyond our values and it informs our values. So for example, a lot of you might have values in your work that says innovation. And then people are left scratching their heads. So I answer phones. How am I supposed to innovate? How am I supposed to innovate doing that? Well, one of our Think 3D ways, our core things is, you are expected to have a figure it out mentality. Meaning, no matter what the role, no matter what the project, no matter what the scope is, you are going to run into a challenge at some point. How are you figuring it out? Right? You need to build function into your culture. Where are the functional statements? This stuff doesn't happen on its own. You have to create it. So, leaving here, thinking about all the stuff you have in front of you, the goals you have, the business plans you have for the next year, the hiring, the training, all of these things. What I want you to think about is how are we defining and communicating our ecosystem or environment? Frustration lies in the gap between expectations and reality. We know that to be true. So if you're not defining it, you should have zero expectation, you can uphold it. And I mean, even if it feels specific and redundant. Remember, we communicate it clearly and often. We have to build our foundation to support it. What I mean by that is, you have to audit your choices internally. Do we say we are about this? Do we say that we value flexibility? Is it one of our core values on our wall? But are we actually flexible? Right? That's what I mean. And finally, we have to be able to hold people accountable to it, and the only way we do that is we create a coaching environment. One of the questions I like to ask people when they tell me, hey, my organization is good at this or they're not good at this, we struggle with training, we struggle with conflict resolution, we struggle with coaching or problem solving, and I ask, how often do you train it? Well, like everyone goes through, no. You said they don't handle conflict well, so how often do you train them on how to do that? The answer is more often than not, it's once, right? You have to train constantly. It's up there 3 times because it's kind of like the first rule of Fight Club thing. It's like, hey, what's the first rule of building intentional cultures? You have to train it constantly. What's the second rule of building intentional cultures? You have to train it constantly. You could have zero expectation that your team, your organization, and your people are able to uphold something or an expectation if you don't train it all the time, right? So those are my things. Think about how you're creating intentional cultures and go forward in the next 12 months. When we come back next year, I hope to hear that you've built something incredible. Thank you all for your time.